Ladies and gentlemen, the Chief Conductor of the Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra, Vasily Petrenko.
That's my tea, then. I can sit here. No, tea is important.
Am I on the right side? I must get my good side, won't you? Right. It is there somewhere.
Good evening.
Vasily, many thanks for giving us your time. I know you are ultra busy. 13 seasons. When you started here, we'd had no 2008 crash. We'd had no mention of the B word, and we'll have no mention tonight.
Beatles, you mean?
That's exactly. Oh, lovely.
Or Beethoven.
The billboards called you the latest signing. You're more like the Mo Salah nowadays.
It's not the latest. Come on.
No, quite. I'm going to ask you all about those intervening years any moment now, but first I want to start on a Mahler tip, as they say. And we're going to watch just a few minutes of Mahler's, I think it's Mahler 1, made 10 years ago. So here it comes. Now, it's funny, I didn't know this was going to be my first question, but it is. What were you thinking when you were watching that? Apart from you're going to get a crick in your neck in any minute.
Well, you know, whenever I'm watching or listening to my recordings, I'm always hypocritical. I think what could have done better. In the orchestra sound, there's a few pictures of me in my stupid view, and also in all interpretation. There were a few moments where the orchestra was not tight enough, in my point of view. In this clip, I mean. There were a few moments where the horns were playing a little bit of creepy notes, I would put this way. There are a few things which could have been improved, and this is live, you know, it's not recording as a studio recording, so for that it's what we get.
That seems a great point to mention, that we are live streaming tonight as well. So any orchestra members watching at home...
You know, the other thing was, what I was thinking is, obviously nearly 10 years passed, and a lot of people are not in the orchestra anymore already.
I noticed lots of oohs and ahs in the audience from people they recognized and then...
But some of them back. Steve Nichols, who is the first horn in this recording, he's now and he was a guest at the time, he's now our third horn officially.
So my first real question is Mahler cycle. You're doing it again next year. The
Yeah, I
obvious
just
question's
love it.
got to be why? Yeah, well, simple as that.
Well, to see what is, I think it's important. It's like a marker. What are we in 10 years? What is the orchestra? What's the orchestra progress over 10 years? What is my view on Gustav symphonies, and how do I feel? Because it will be different inevitably. But what is the difference? What is understanding of his music now comparing to that? A lot of symphonies at that cycle 10 years ago I was doing for the first time. Now I've done a lot of them since quite a lot of times. So to me, I'd say it's the territory which is much more familiar than it used to be by then.
And the music hasn't changed. You've obviously changed, as you said. Do you think, and Mahler famously said he'd try to capture the whole world in there. Do you think they'll sound noticeably different to people who come and hear them? Will they be like, oh my word, audibly listen to what's happening?
I guess they will be different, again, because the world have changed. Because not just we changed, because the world changed. Because 10 years ago, the situation in a social life was quite different than turbulence of 2 days, for instance. And because of the orchestra have changed. But to say that they'll sound radically non-Mahler, no. It will still be what Gustav wanted. We'll just probably go even more into the core of his idiomas, into his character.
What is it about a Mahler cycle there's two questions here, that excites you as a conductor, but also scares the heck out of a marketing and finance department when they see them coming up?
Well, finance department, of course, scared because it's a lot of musicians every musician has to be paid, and that's quite a big spending on it. For me, it's a journey of the man who, and I honestly think he probably was one of the greatest conductors of all the time, himself. He had a considerable success as opera conductor, as orchestra conductor. He had this huge career as a conductor, and that was his main revenue. He also was one of the most demanding conductors ever. That's why he was sacked almost from everywhere, or he left. He never was compromising with musicians, with management, with anyone. But that was a way to move the art forward. And in terms of the symphony, in terms of writing, I think he was probably first truly existential composer. Even if you say that this is about the whole world, it's not just about the whole world, it's about the world through the eyes of Mahler. Beethoven, for instance, was writing the symphony also about the Titans. It's all how you can see it from the way of superhuman. It's the deeds of superhuman, it's the fights of superhuman, which then can be implemented to the simple person. You can feel yourself as a superhero, see it by his or her side, and then go back into your life and see what can be implemented. In terms of Mahler, no, it's a struggle of everyone. this is why. This is either in this first symphony, when it's in nature and the sounds of nature, sometimes with grotesque, with parody. And then it's this question, why do we suffer so heavily? Why do we suffer? A lot of us suffer all our lives. And why it is contrary to the beauty of the nature. Some of the parts of the human bestiary, it's so horrible that it goes so much in contrast with the beauty of the nature. This is, for instance, in the first symphony. And then many others. He went through his life into territories of exploration of his character and of the all aspects of social life and the world.
When you did them first time around, they were called the Mahler edition. There was the Mahler, there was the song cycles as well. There was the Mahler interpretations of other composers. This time you're honing it down to just the 9.
Well, this time it's 1 year. The last time we had it over 2 years, so you just can't. If I would do just Mahler edition, then the orchestra will play just Mahler, and that probably will drive them mad.
And I'm going to be really vaguely rude here. And so 13 seasons on, they're simply going to be better, aren't they? You're going to be more informed. You're going to be more, as you say, you've performed them more and more times.
I don't know. I will leave it to the audience to decide, to be honest. I'm always aiming for better performance on every day basis. But will they be? You will see.
I'm going to move on, if I might, to the other great cycle that's on its way, Shostakovich. This is I think it's fair to say this is the partnership that critically brought the Liverpool Phil and yourself right to the forefront with the recordings. Do you feel an absolute connection with Shostakovich? He died 75, you were born 76. You called him...
Missed, yeah.
Just missed him. You called him the greatest Russian symphonist of the 20th... No, the greatest symphonist of the 20th century.
I agree. He was... to say connection, yes, because I grew up in Leningrad, not in St. Petersburg, in Leningrad. And there's a difference. And this is a city where he was living. This is a city where he was writing about. And it's a biopic of someone living in a very difficult time. If you imagine him being born just on the edge of the first Russian Revolution, then went through the big Russian Revolution, the October Revolution, Civil War, Stalin Purge, Second World War, after war repressions, then the Khrushchev time, where it's a little bit of a spring, and then into the Brezhnev. He witnessed so many things. Gagarin flew to space. Nuclear bomb was exist. A lot of the other inventions on the good and on the bad way. And he was witnessing all that. And a lot of it reflected in his symphonies. He decided to make the symphonies as a main genre of his writing. He, of course, had written a few operas, ballets, but for him, that was very, very important to give such way in his life to write the symphonies. So for me, it is connection through the city. When I'm conducting his symphonies anywhere, and it's quite a big part of my repertoire, I almost have a visual pictures in my mind of Leningrad, of that time, and of different areas, different territories, different happenings, like Leningrad Symphony, for instance, with all the siege and what he was feeling at that time. Of the 13th Symphony, Babi Yar, where it's what was happening, not just at Babi Yar, but also in Yevtushenko, in his poetry, and at the time of how this poetry was respected in intelligence circles of the Soviet society. So for that, it is a connection, for sure.
How did you come to them? Whose symphonies did you, whose versions and recordings did you know?
Well, I've listened a lot of them live, obviously, in Leningrad, and I grew up with many of them, but not all of them, I have to say, performed. There's some of them which are a little bit more obscure than others. I listened to many. I find when we started to talk about the whole cycle of Shostakovich, and I was a little bit younger, so I thought that it's a big challenge, and for instance, if you ask me, do I want to record a full cycle of Mahler, first thing will be in my mind, how many great cycles of Mahler the world has at the moment? Probably 10. You can name, there's Bernstein, there's Scholti, there's Tenstedt, there's quite a lot of them. And when I started to explore about Shostakovich, there wasn't a single one. There were several symphonies recorded in an incredible way, like Mravinsky with several symphonies with Leningrad Philharmonic, Rostropovich with a few of the symphonies with Washington Orchestra, Kondrashin with Danish Radio, and some other conductors, foreign conductors with other symphonies. But as a cycle, no, it wasn't exist, and they all uneven. Gergiev, who was recording roughly at the same time, some of the symphonies incredible and ingenious. Some others are, at least it's not in my taste. So for that, I was really looking into have a consistency of the cycle, and that's what I think was one of the big parts of the success. That the lower bar was so high that the people started to respect that this is a bar, and that's my aim for the orchestra. I'm very often telling to the orchestra and to the public sometime that the peak concerts, it's great and it's very important, but much more important is that the worst concerts or the less interesting concerts are very, very high standard as well. So this lower standards, you have to raise it day by day. You should never allow yourself to go below certain standard. And that's what was my task, and that's what we were doing over those years.
When I looked at the order you did them in, it was like 15 numbers in random order. What informed the order?
Well, we had a little bit of collaboration with Naxos, who actually recording company who distributed all the discs later on, and partly that was our collaboration with them in discussion. Partly it was also how to build the orchestra into the territories of more difficult symphonies towards the end. When you get more familiar with idiomas of Shostakovich, there's some more difficult symphonies. In number 14, it's one of the very challenging in terms of all the chamber playing and tight styles. Number 4, in terms of scale, is quite challenging as well. So we were doing it in discussion with Naxos in many ways.
And it's interesting to say, you know, we could see it, you recorded, as you say, there weren't many out, there was none out there. But this orchestra also now has 15 Shostakovich symphonies under its belt that they've experienced. Are they a greater Russian orchestra in that sense, in inverted commas, for it?
Well, you know, people say about Russian music, but Russian music was so different over the years. I think what unites Shostakovich and Tchaikovsky, for instance, is the folklore. So the melodies, which are entirely different, obviously, because language of 19th century, language of 20th century, but has its roots into the folklore, into the folk songs, and that's what unites the melodies. But talking about the writing, they're very far apart. You look into Tchaikovsky or Rachmaninoff writing and into Shostakovich writing, it's quite different. I think we're more talking about the manner of playing, and this is what I was addressing from the very beginning, that especially string training is very different. In Soviet Union and in Russia, there's not such a thing as orchestra musician. Everybody trained as a soloist, as a string player. So from the very early stage, from like 5-6 years old, everybody wants to be Oistrach or Rostropovich, and trained very heavily and work very, very heavily and learn, study. Like, you know, normal, it's about at least 5-6 hours a day to practice any instrument. It's normal. Those who are more advanced, they go up to 8 or 10 hours sometimes. So for that, of course, everybody has this training, but maybe 1 out of 100 makes it way as a solo career, and all remaining goes into the orchestra. So in the orchestra, you have incredible school and richness of the sound, the soloist sound. So people there, they're not trying to be a part of the pack, they're trying to be individuals, which is great because you can get some incredibly rich sound. But on the other hand, you have 12 or 16 individuals, each one has its own opinion. and each one thinks that the desk partner has rubbish opinion, and they all collectively think that conductor has absolutely no idea. So for that, how to bring them into discipline, this is quite a challenge sometimes. Rather than here in UK especially, people play much more together immediately. They have all manners and they have a habit to listen what's the neighbors doing, what's front doing, what's back doing. As a teamwork, it's incredible, but to get from them a very rich sound, this is more difficult. So there's always ups and downs. And that's what I was training the orchestra gradually about how to play at some time. But again, not all the time. When we're going into territories of Beethoven, for instance, when we did a Beethoven cycle a couple of years ago, that's a very different sound. It's for strings, it's more precision. It should not have that much of the vibrato, for instance. So those elements are constant training. And that's why I think in territory of Shostakovich, they were feeling a bit more familiar at the time.
Are there any that you feel you have to get through? And is there one, you would say, from a burning building, one of the 15? I don't want to ask you to name your favourite son or anything, but...
It's not about a favourite. I think historically, the fourth, which has a very difficult history, he had written the fourth and they started to rehearse. And that's when the campaign against him after Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk, after opera started. And literally his music started to get banned everywhere. And first of all, in Leningrad at the time, they replaced the conductor. So one conductor started rehearsal, and then in 2 days, they said, no, it will be another guy. And then Shostakovich came and said, sorry, but this guy does not know a score, and it's a premiere, so it's a difficult symphony. And it's the closest actually to Mahler. It's like Mahler 11 or 12. It's the same idea. And then they were still rehearsing for another 2 days, and then he had a call from the Philharmonic director who asked him, can you please withdraw the symphony? And he said, so why? I said, well, you know, this is a campaign and your music is getting banned. We think that this symphony will not have a really good result. And he said, I'm not afraid, Shostakovich said, I'm not afraid. And he honestly, I think, wasn't. And then this director said, if you're not afraid for yourself, think about all others and be afraid for them. And that's why Shostakovich withdrew the symphony after premiere and say that, okay, it went into reworking, as he said. And then only after the war, the score was kept, original score was kept in 2 places in Gauck, one of the conductor's luggage, and then in Shostakovich house. After it, he said in the 60s, he said that, okay, I now reworked the score so much and I present you the new version. By then it was a very different time. He was well respected, back into power. And they did a premiere. Kondrashin helped him a little bit. But apparently when you compare that score to the other score, he made no changes at all. So for that, and because it wasn't known for 30 years, and by the time it was premiered, he had written 11th and 12th symphony. So by then he was still numbered. So the number 4 would still exist, but never played. So, if that would be premiered, it might have a very different path of his career. It might be that because of this symphony withdrawn and huge pressure, number 5, which is one of the most famous, which almost like casted from coal into diamond in some ways, but when he started to compromise, when he started to make a crypt, everything up till number 4, it's pure, honest, humble Shostakovich. No crypting, no messages, no hidden messages. From number 5, it's already starting to give all the layers of messaging about certain things to different layers of society. So would he be in such way, in such trajectory? Difficult to say. And on top of that, number 4 is really incredible piece of music, really incredible. Probably, again, because he was so humble, so honest. It's one of those unrivaled even by his other symphonies.
I'm going to switch and come over to these shores. And arguably, if Shostakovich is the national composer in Russia, Elgar, you have also put on. Did you find it in any way tougher to interpret Elgar, or is it just did the music just speak in the way music speaks to you?
Well, it took me a while to go to his idiomas, obviously, and I'm saying it also quite often. In the world, people know Enigma, some of the Pomp and Circumstances, violin concerto, and maybe cello concerto. If you talk to the public, general public or wide public in the world about Elgar symphonies, and we're not even going into the Dream of Gerontius, the Apostles, or the other oratorios, the Kingdom. This is a territory which is uncharted. So, because of that, I knew Enigma, obviously, from the early age. I knew violin concerto and cello concerto, but then going into the symphonies, it took me a while to, I guess, absorb the way of British society lives at the moment, and to absorb the other music as well. And then it's very familiar because so many years here and so much respect to the British culture.
And the other great symphonies you put down, the Tchaikovskys as well.
Well, we've done a lot, you know. There's also Rachmaninoff Symphony. There's plenty of things, and there's even more discs to come. But about Tchaikovsky, yes, about Tchaikovsky, the idea of those recordings were that I'm trying to give a message that Tchaikovsky, of course, Russian person at core, but his way of composing, his way of orchestration is so close to German tradition. So you can see a lot of similarity in orchestration from Brahms or from Berlioz. And the way of constructing symphonies is purely up till maybe Manfred and the Sixth, which is a bit different. It's more in classical tradition. And that's what I was trying to implement, the discipline in Tchaikovsky, because a lot of people think that it's just emotions and hysteria. No, he was a philosopher as well. He was a Mason himself, member of Mason Lodge. He was apparently the man who spent, for instance, nearly 3 years of his life in Italy, spread over the months. He spoke French better than Russian, as a lot of aristocracy at the time. And he also was very interested in various aspects of politics. So he was a man who had a very broad vision, and he had this discipline in his music, and that's what I was trying to do, to make certain transparency, not just a gusto sound, and that's why this project was happening.
When I hear of students going to music college, you often hear of them, a new teacher, taking them apart and starting again. Was there any of that you did here when you got here?
You mean with orchestra?
Yeah, and with particular composers. You've talked of balancing the orchestra years ago, that was.
There are some time, it's not a secret that the difficulty when you go and conduct any orchestra is the piece which have never played or never been in tradition, even some unknown composers, or the piece which has been overplayed. Because if it has never played, then to establish the tradition, sometimes it's very difficult within 2-3 days of rehearsals. And if it's overplayed, then there's a lot of habits, individual and collective habits in the orchestra, how to play. And to overcome those habits is also extremely difficult. So for that, it's the pieces which have been played, but not too frequent. And for that, some of Tchaikovsky's symphonies, for instance, they had those kind of layers of traditions which I was taking out, saying, no, sorry, that's what he had written. It's not what the others thought, it's what he had written. And then there are some others, especially number 2, number 3, which is by far rarely played, and which has also premonition that this is a bad music. There's not such a thing as a bad music. You just need to interpret it, and you have to believe in it. And those ones, they were requiring a little bit of push into that territory.
Before we go any further, I'd like us to experience some rather talented children who will appear up here.
This time, I'm sorry, I have to do that. Hey!
I probably don't need to tell anybody in this room what we've just watched, the amazing and, to be fair, world-renowned In Harmony, emulated around the world. They're I think that was their 8th birthday, wasn't it? Just celebrated their 10th birthday. You were in at the start. Can you remember why you wanted this to happen? Why you wanted it? Why was it important?
Well, first of all, when you look into those children, we gave them a chance. And this is very important, to give a chance to the children, first of all, to at least hear classical music. And as you know, it started in the area where otherwise probably kids will have absolutely no chance to go to the concert. So for that, this is important. How it started, first we were discussing with my colleagues in British regional orchestras to make an agreement, and we made an agreement then, about giving a free access to every school child in Great Britain into the classical concert. So over the years, it was in 2007, I think, when we were discussing it, over the years, over 12 million of children were into the concert for free. And this was a one step. And then this is, of course, nationwide. And then when I was looking into Liverpool, Liverpool has a great orchestra. How about music school? How about something like college or conservatoire? The nearest is Royal Northern College of Music in Manchester. But if Manchester has one, why Liverpool shouldn't have? So for that, I was thinking to create something what then ideally will feed the orchestra with the local people. We have a very few members of those. But we have a very few members of the orchestra who are born and bred here in Merseyside or Liverpool. So for that, I wanted to do that. And we were at first with few musicians from the orchestra and few kids into Westminster. We made a special event in one of the functioning rooms. We had a few MPs passing by and learning what is double bass like. And there were a few kids, and we basically were presenting this idea that the primary school started with only 60 children there, and it was attached to the priory church, where it's now the orchestra rehearsal base as well. So we started with the idea that at least those children in a school will have an ability to play in the orchestra, will have ability to learn with a musician from the Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra instrument, whichever they choose at the time, and they will have a general music education which will be provided to them. Now it's well over 1,500 kids involved in the program. There's 3 schools. We go even further, and I would encourage all of you to help and support such program. The orchestra, of course, spends some money on it as well, but it cannot be done without the help of the supporters, help of the community. And you won't imagine how little it cost. in numbers. There's some staggering figures, you can find it online, but all that, with your help, my goal is that every child has ability. Not necessarily everybody will do that, but every child has ability to learn the classical music and learn the beauty of instruments, the beauty of music. As a result, when we started in 2006, I think, or 7, if I'm right, quickly the crime rate was down by a third. The school, which was one of the lower schools on the table of the exams results, it became third in the region by the exam results. And the whole area started to regenerate. So you can watch in this West Everton that there's plenty of new development, commercial, residential, and all sort of things. And that literally improving the life of people who are there. Because over the years, I think 20 years, there was quite deprived territory. So that was one of the drivers into the future. And for me, it's important that it's alive, that we have extension of the project, and we hope it will expand.
Did music get the credit in the way it should have done for that? All those things you've said?
A lot, because you involve the whole community into it. And I remember that for the first time when we just started, there was an event above this level. It's not exist anymore in the Roderwold suite. And the parents and some of the kids, but mainly parents, came. And the Philharmonic staffs were saying to me, Vasily, we have to warn you, it's not our regular audience. I said, so what? So what is the problem? I said, well, it's not the people who are coming frequently. I said, they will come then more frequent. We have to just talk to them. And apart from the fact that at the beginning on this meeting, I probably barely understood half of what they were saying. I now have a more habit for Scouse accent, and I understand, I'd say maybe 3/4. But by then it was a bit difficult. Anyway, and they all were people who also by then were a little bit skeptical, because I think they've seen a lot of programs which were presented to them as a way to the future, and in fact were doing nothing. But for me what's important is that what developing around should also develop inside the people. And that's what I was saying. You all have to get involved to it. You all have to bring your passion. And we can't do it for you. We can do it with you. And that led into a situation when they all get involved. Of course, children started to beg parents to save some money for the instrument, because we couldn't provide instruments for everyone. They were sharing instruments. And of course, they all started to beg parents to saving and literally doing some other savings and not doing too many guilty pleasures of the time. So that led into a situation when the whole community started to form around this core. And then they all started to come here, and a lot of people, they're still coming.
They do say don't work with children and animals, but you've made quite a habit of it. The Liverpool Philharmonic Youth Orchestra, is that an entirely different animal in that sense?
Well, there's a few people from In Harmony already promoted into the youth orchestra. I hope, and this is my dream, it's like the football club pyramid, so that at the end you will have some of them who started there in Harmony and who will then be members of Royal Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra. But it's still a few years to go. They're growing up, but not immediately.
You've also, you've done your National Youth Orchestra work, the European Union Youth Orchestra. Is that I'm going to be very blunt here. Is it an add-on, or is it actually how you get the elixir of life every week, working with people like that? Is it an absolute pleasure, or is it something you feel you should do out of duty?
No, to me, working with youngsters is always pleasure. it exhausts. And because of the simple, it's a pleasure, but you get really exhausted at the end. It's simply because most of the players, either in this orchestra, or National Youth Orchestra, or European Union Youth Orchestra, they're playing piece for the first time. And being in a young age, they give everything at every single moment. There's no regrets. And they expect from you exactly the same. You cannot allow yourself of just doing rehearsal. Every time it has to be at absolute maximum. And the way they give energy and they expect from you to give them amount of energy. It's like, imagine someone a little bit hypo in 18 or late teens years with a lot of energy who wants you to go and rave with him or her all the time. And imagine now 100 people like that who expect it from you. So, but it gives enormous pleasure. First of all, because you go to edition of orchestra, and each of those orchestras, they're changing the personnel. Obviously, they're going older and they're leaving the orchestra, and then some youngsters coming up. So for that, every time you see a huge pack sometimes of extremely talented individuals, but individuals are not team. And then you see how from those individuals, they pack a team and formulate a team over just like 5 or 6 days. And you see them being a unit. You see them understanding the importance of working together and progressing together. This is actually, especially in case of European Union, it's one of the most important things. It's one of the rare examples for European Union how working together in peace we can bring such a prosperous future. Not all the politicians feel the same, but let's face it, a lot of people think about total independence. But we're trying to give such an example. And it's really true. It's a good school also for them to be in collective. Because imagine you are any instrumentist, you play bassoon, for instance. You're always on your own. You practice on your own. You probably go to the orchestra or to play the duet or trio, but it's random and very rare. And then you suddenly have to live with another 120, 130 individuals, the same as you, individuals, but together. And you have to respect and acknowledge the wishes of everyone. You have to also find the way how you can prosper, how you can improve your individual level and collective level. So for that, as a social institution, it is also very interesting and very big pleasure to see them all. And the most probably belated pleasure is nowadays, because I was working with all of those youngsters for the last 15 years, to see a lot of them across the world in the orchestras, already in professional orchestras. So now nearly any orchestra I'm coming, in Europe for sure, that there's someone after the first rehearsal coming whom I don't recognize, they changed so much. And saying, oh, I played with you in blah, 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 in this or that orchestra as a young musician. And now I'm here, second horn player, for instance. Great. And that's important. It's an incredible pleasure to see them doing well in their lives.
I wanted to mention a few names to you. Emily Howard, Danny Howard, Stephen Pratt, Mark Anthony Turnage, Ken Hesketh. It must be great fun programming the new music. I have this vision of you with the furry cat on your knee, and you're just thinking, I can program what I want, new music. How do you go about deciding?
Well, it's not that easy. I wish it would be, but it's not. I think that performing the new music, contemporary music, it's a vital part. It is very important. It prevents us from being in a museum. I don't want to be exponate in a museum, in Neanderthal. I want to be alive, and I want classical music to be alive. And only way for it to be alive is in new compositions to appear, to be performed, to get respect or disrespect. And through the time and through the public opinion, to filter it into the masterpieces. That's what was historically happening. For instance, we know Mozart, and we know Salieri only as some guy who could have poisoned him. But apparently at the time, Salieri was more popular, much more popular than Mozart, his music. Then the things changed, and now we know Mozart much more, music of Mozart much more than music of Salieri. The same about Johann Sebastian Bach, who was neglected for many years, and then Felix Mendelssohn Bartholdy, he made this festival and opened up his music again. So this process was always happening, and it's happening now as well. So to me, to perform the contemporary music, especially the contemporary music of the place, all the names you mentioned, they are British. And to do that, to give a chance for the local composers to have their music performed, it's a duty, it is important. If we won't give them a chance, who will? You know, if the piece is written but not performed, who can decide, is it good or bad? Maybe some musicologist, but if it's not performed, how could it be? Then of course it's up to the public to decide, is the piece which deserves to be performed more and to be masterpiece or not. But I think we have to do it. However, talking about the programming, I don't want to perform contemporary music for the selective group of 100 gurus who came for the concert of contemporary music and then they just share with each other, have you been on that concert of contemporary music? No. Have you been on this concert? And then the rest of the hall is empty. So when you're programming, you have to be very careful. You have to find a way how to bring the right amount of audience to hear. Even, let's put it straight, a lot of people are quite skeptical about new pieces. And even if they're skeptical about new pieces, they will still come and listen to it. Then they can decide. But how can you be skeptical before listening? So my duty in programming is to make the program such interesting that much more people, ideally the full house, always will come and listen into one of the items, at least, which will be contemporary.
And surely if programming a concert of, shall we say, standard repertoire classical music is hard, it must be phenomenally hard to program music you have not yet heard. How do you go about deciding in an objective world, here's the person I want?
Well, we know a few composers. Some of the names, Danny Howard, we just performed her piece 2 weeks ago. And some of the people you know, obviously, by their other compositions and by their reputation. Some of the people who are just upcoming and you get interested in them. And then sometimes you do it on occasion, so you commission the piece with exact program, which was historically done, like tone poems, or with exact length or exact character. So for that, it is obviously always, I think, a gamble to commission the piece, because you never know what will be an outcome. But you sort of believe and trust into some of the composers more than another, and then it's your personal choice. But it is also the pieces which are just coming by mail. And then you look at them, you observe, and then you find some jewels, and then you're thinking and trying how to program them.
The artistic team here gave me a list of the repertoire. It's a very long list. Do you keep all the scores yourself and think, I'll go back to that, or do you keep them, everything you conduct yourself?
There's some of them are kept in the library here. Obviously, I have not so big house, and so some of and also children at home. So some of them kept here. Some of them nowadays in electronic. So it's just the files, to be honest. But some of them, yes, they are for further consideration. It's not an easy process. You know, today we had double rehearsal with orchestra. Between rehearsal, I had another meeting, and then rehearsal finished at 4:30. From 4:30 up till 6:45 or maybe 6:50, I had a programming meeting for another 2 hours and a quarter. Then another one is coming tomorrow. And then probably, because on Friday we're performing in Newcastle on the Sage, and on the way to Gateshead, we probably will have another thing. It's a constant work. It requires a lot of effort, a lot of knowledge, and obviously a lot of very careful programming.
And is that knock on into how you program for tours as well? I mean, do you get to program your tours, or do you get invited to tour with do they suggest things that people do invite?
Both happening. Usually it is a discussion between the tour promoters and the orchestra, what sort of repertoire they want and what can we offer. And it's not an easy task, first of all, because you're going on tour, imagine you're playing 6 or 7 concerts. Ideally, you want to play the same repertoire because there's no rehearsing time. It's day after day. Or maybe maximum 2 programs. And then the different places, one wants Beethoven, another wants Shostakovich, the third wants Mahler, the other wants Stravinsky. And then you start to kind of try to find the compromises. But it goes both ways, and it's also part of it is the soloist, obviously, what the soloist suggests as his or her repertoire. And then it is also how it fits into your season.
Is it important at all to take British music abroad when you tour? Do you think of that?
Of course. As a British orchestra, we are coming every time with at least one piece of British music. If it's not in the main program, then it's encore.
You've done China twice, I believe, Japan twice. You're going back to Japan, is that?
Yep. I don't know how much of that I'm allowed to say, but it's in foreseeable future, let's put it this way.
We're live streaming, sorry.
Yeah.
And am I right in thinking your first tour was Malta? Is that right?
Yep. That was my first tour, and there was also a birthday party there because it was the first time. It's even before I started. I think it was 2006.
Right.
So it was my 30th birthday at that time. We had very interesting tour. Very little work and a lot of time there. They brought me cake of size of huge table. So it was a good memories. The concert was open air in La Valletta, right in the fortress. There were some organizing things. They told me first that we have to wait a little bit for television to arrive because all 4 cameras of Maltesian television were involved at the time. Then we were waiting a little bit more because it was huge crowd, something like, I think 4,000 people or something, like the whole inside of the fortress. And the access to it is just one very narrow bridge, pedestrian bridge. So we were waiting for the crowd, so it was delayed for another. So the total delay was 40 minutes of the start of the concert, and the last person we were waiting is Prime Minister of Malta, who said, and actually I quite respect it, that I will come the last, so that we don't start the concert because people could not get access, so that in a way respect to your citizen. So, and then they told me that you have to invite him to stand up and play Maltesian anthem. And I've obviously never seen this person. And they told me, well, you'll recognize him easy. And you expect the monarch, it's fine, but there is a president, it's a bit more difficult to find. Anyway, and then by then they faxed a music for the national anthem and the orchestra parts. But the problem was that the music came through, but because it was trimmed at the top and at the bottom, the tempo indication was not there. So I came to the local guy, their technician, and said, "Are you Maltese?" He said, "Yeah, yeah." And I said, "So, how it goes? Fast, slow?" He looked at me and said, "What it is?" I said, "It's your national anthem. Could you sing it?" Anyway, Then I went on stage with all those delays, which actually was probably good because it was summer in July, so it was quite hot before. So by the time it was nice brief. And then first thing I see, it's a front row, which is, I don't know, maybe 50 or 60 people. All of them exactly the same in his suits, looking at me, bureaucrats. One of them is president. And he has to stand up and then we do the anthems, but he doesn't know about it. So it was a little bit of... Then some guys stood up, everybody stood up, we played an anthem. Audience didn't sing, so I'm not even now, I'm not sure that was right. But anyway, that was one of those memories. Yeah, good memories.
I'll head the opposite way from the ridiculous to the sublime. You brought a lot of great opera to Bryn, I'm thinking of particularly, Sir Bryn Terfel. As we mentioned earlier, goes right back with you. Is it a totally different animal conducting an opera orchestra in that sense?
It is a little bit different, obviously. Now in late November, December, and December, we'll do Big Dam in the Met, in Metropolitan Opera in New York, the next big project. But I started as opera conductor, and of course it is art where you have to cope with many, many more people, not just musically, but stage workers, when this set of decorations moved here or there, light engineers, when such light or that light change have happened. It's many, many more people involved in the performance. And of course with singers, the thing is that when the singer sings on stage, quite often he or she cannot hear what the orchestra is doing. So for that you have to be able to carry on with the singer with a matter of trust and musicality and prediction sometimes what will happen in the next moment. Because if you just simply say the orchestra listen and accompany, it won't work because the orchestra will be always late. So for that you have to know how to judge all those people, plus balancing. When you're working in the pit as a conductor, you have a very different sound from what it is in the hall. Sometimes you may even not hear the soloist, the singer, but the voice projects above you very well into the hall. But you have to guess, you have to guide in that terms. And sometimes opposite. You hear the soloist very well. It depends on acoustics on the whole. You hear the soloist very well, but it doesn't carry to the whole, so you have to calm down the orchestra with their volume. It is, on the other hand, it is less abstract than symphonic music, simply because there's words and there's a story. If you listen to the symphony, it's your own individual interpretation what the composer wanted to say. Apart from the very few symphonies, it's you think what is music about. In opera, all the libretto, all the text is given. So for that, it is immediate. And this has a pro and contra. Pro, that it's a very, very direct impact in all your senses, also visual. Dresses, visual effects, poses, everything. On the negative, not negative, but the darker side of it, that this is a moment when you have to support with your music the storytelling. Once the music or the story goes different directions, then opera doesn't happening. This is what happens, in my point of view, sometimes with the modern staging of the operas, when the staging is so far from original that it goes opposite direction from what the composer was writing in the music. And then you still have to compromise, you have to know how to deal with it. And of course, working in a Russian opera, starting there, gives you great school. You have to be ready for everything. The soloist just liked the note which he or she sang and stopped there, fermata. It sounds nice today. Or, and it happened in my life, some friend visited the soloist in the interval and they drank a bottle of vodka between them. And the second half somehow goes a bit dizzy in his voice. So, it gives an incredible experience, and manually you have to be, it's a great school, you have to be ready for everything in any single moment. I had a lot of stories. I probably, if I'll start to share them, the evening will not finish.
I have a question, but before I have a question, I have a few things I would like to say. I have been a subscriber here for many years, before you came, so I have been following the development of the orchestra in your time, and I think it has been absolutely fantastic.
Thank you.
And I just want to say thank you very much.
Thank you.
Then comes the question, that's more tricky. Because it goes back to, I think, 2007. There was a program on BBC called Hard Talk with a journalist called Stephen Zucker, and he had you in the chair. And as far as I remember, I can't remember your exact words, but I think you told Stephen Zucker that your ambition was to make the Liverpool Philharmonic Orchestra count amongst the world's best orchestras. And I think it took Stephen Zucker by surprise. But I liked your answer. But you said to him, why not? And my question to you is, have you achieved it?
I think to a certain extent, definitely yes. We now regard by amount of awards we collected over those years and by amount of success we had in the different countries, by amount of demands we now have comparing to what was 15 years ago into going on tours into different places. Yes, for sure. But I still think there's no limits. So, I'm saying it to the orchestra that behind one mountain there's another one to climb. And this, I think it's endless process of improvement in orchestra, any orchestra in the world. There's an endless process of searching for truth in music, searching of the perfect interpretation of the perfect piece, as close as it could have been thought by the composer 100 years ago, 200 years ago, or nowadays. So for that, it is an endless process, and we are constantly working on the orchestra beats and technical skills, mental skills, all sorts of skills, collective skills. So for that, there's still a lot of improvements I can see ahead. Talking about this Hard Talk program, I have to say to Stephen, if he's watching me probably, which I doubt. At the time when we were making this program, I had no idea what is this program about and who he is. And to be honest, I was talking very sincerely and very honestly with him, and we had a very nice conversation while recording this program. And then later on, we met several times in the various places, and he told me that I was one of the best and interesting and easy program for him. Because he was trying, I think it's his job as a journalist to trying to crack any person he interviews. And some of them he really asks some very hard questions. Later on I watched a couple of shows with some other people. And I think they all trying to avoid answering the questions. And that what puts him in a seat where he still pushing this button. Rather than with me, I was not trying to avoid it. I was just answering sincerely and honestly. And this is what I was believing back then, that's what I believe now. So this is where we are moving. And I think, to me, honestly, the biggest achievements of all the years, apart from the orchestra excellence, was probably amount of audience. We now, I think, about a third more audience than it was years ago. Even in quite a difficult economic climate of nowadays, it means that the trust between the orchestra and the audience is bigger than it has been at the time, and it means that this will expose into the future as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
More questions, please. Oh, right next to
Just
you.
behind you.
Hi. Just interested in how you personally prepare for a symphony or a program. Do you go through the score technically? Do you visualize it? Do you hear it within you? Do you think emotionally where you want to go? What's the preparation, as it were, before you do a...
Well, it's complex preparation. I mean, it starts with purely music. It's like you're reading the book. So when I look into the page of score, I can hear it in my mind immediately. It's imagine as if you're reading the play and you hear the voices in your head of various personages, as you imagine them. It's a little bit more prescribed in the music because it's all has a pitch and it all has articulation. But you can, watching the score, you can hear how it sounds. And then while doing that and adding some minimal marking, actually I have to say that further and further in my life, I'm adding less and less markings into the score because when you put some marking, it distracts your attention in the page from the other things. And ideally, you should have the complex picture of the whole music, not the attention to one particular instrument. So then, after I've done that, I'm reading about the composer, about the context of the piece, about all the historical happenings at the time, and a lot of it I already know because so much music written at the same age. And then I'm listening to few recordings and formulate the way how I see or I hear this piece. So that's literally the preparation. It takes a while. I mean, it's constant because every week is different repertoire. So last week was completely different repertoire in Oslo for a centenary. And next week is again, it's very different repertoire. So every week you rehearsing one program and you preparing another one, at least, or another two. So it's a lot of work, but if you love it, you never get tired.
You are famous for your hands.
Do you want to explain?
A lot of people watch them. Which hand do you... Well, both are expressive, but the left hand is particularly famous. Can you tell us about them?
I'm right-handed. But the thing, telling about the hands, I never practiced with mirror. It is, for conductors, it's quite a lot of people using that as a practicing, standing in front of mirror and basically going graphically into, so especially at the very beginning. You will think it's easy. It's not easy purely graphically to control your hands. It's not an easy process. And also to relate it with music. But I never done it. And my teacher was always saying, and I think he was absolutely right, that if everything is right in your head, hands will follow, and then the orchestra will follow. If there's something not right in your head, then however great your hands are, it's useless. So for that, it is all here. It is how you formulate, how you think about music, how you rehearse with the orchestra, what you want to say, literally. What is the message which you want to give? Once you have it very, very clearly, once you have this clear vision of what you want, then all the hands are following, even the left one.
We have a microphone if you'd like it. Did you get that?
Yeah, it's about the question what I think about the Shostakovich score for the Hamlet film. I think Shostakovich has written a lot of great music for films, for movie, and not just a lot of songs. Apparently, not so many people knows that he was writing a lot, and some of the circus music as well. So for that, I think this one is very interesting score. However, he was very precise what scores from the cinematograph he wanted to be performed separately as a suites or as separate movements, and what scores he thought they has to be done only as part of the movie. And that was one of them. He was very clearly saying that I want that one mainly to be only seen as part of the movie.
There are pieces that he wrote that didn't end up in the film.
Of course.
There is a recording with the whole of the event.
Of course, as with many films. You know, quite recently, there's a composer called Albert Guinovar, a Catalan composer. And I did a few recordings of his music in Spain and actually in St. Petersburg. He's also a very gifted pianist, and he had written 2 piano concertos, which I recorded with him there. He was one of the composers who had written all the music for The Artist. Do you remember there's a silent film with a music, quite recent one? There were 4 of them. He was one of the 4. And it happened that around this time, I made a premiere of his Christmas songs oratorio, which are actually great Spanish songs elaborate, not just Spanish, but songs elaborated in Spanish motif with a choir and soloist. I've done it in Valladolid in Spain. So, and we spoke about this film, which by then was just out. And I said to him, so it's a huge score, because imagine, this is like 2 hours of pure music, non-stop. And he said to me, if you would know how much was cut. So they provided in total for up to 6 hours of music. And from that, the other 4 were just gone into the bin. And that's historically happened with a lot of film composers and film music.
If you could have round for dinner one contemporary composer and one from history, who would you invite round and what would you cook?
I don't think that question can be bettered.
Yeah. You mean contemporary from living composers?
Yes, one living and one.
Yeah. From living composers. I would. It's interesting. There's quite a few. Like it's very difficult to choose one. I would probably like to talk to Arvo Pärt, Estonian composer. On the same hand, on the same territory, Rodion Shchedrin, just to talk to him because he witnessed so many things in the Soviet musical history. Just to talk and to see what it is. There's a few with whom I luckily had a dinner, like John Adams, for instance. That was very interesting. There's, I wouldn't say dinner, but we had a bit of conversation with John Williams. It was also very interesting. And there's a lot of them living. I had quite a long conversation actually with Krzysztof Penderecki and with his wife, Elżbieta Penderecka. That was it's still part of a life history, so it's difficult to name one because they're all very interesting.
What's cooking?
It depends on who it is, and then you have to go for national. But you know, to be honest, I probably wouldn't go for a lot of food. I will go for some drinks with them. And talking about of the past, and that actually will kind of make a very nice arc. I wish if the time machine would exist to be present at this meeting or walk which Gustav Mahler and Sigmund Freud had. They had this walk for over 3 or 4 hours around, I think, Lucerne Lake, if I'm right. And we're talking about something which neither of them then disclosed in details. Mm-hmm. So to be there present and to see those minds talking about culture, psychology, potentially, and the world, that would be very interesting. But not yet.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think you'll agree the answers have been extensive, eloquent, and I'd just like to thank him for his privileged insight, Vasily Petrenko.
Pleasure.